All right, guys, here we go. The last of chapter 7, audiences and audience research. Now, let's take a quick note here regarding samples, where we get information from. Obviously, we don't poll everybody that's within a population, so we have to get a representative sample in some way, shape, or form. Most companies involved in media research use some form of probability or random sampling procedures to select a sample. And that means that every member of the population under the study has an equal chance of being selected and represented in the study. Basically, kind of a pure lottery of sorts. Someone is picked literally at random, and they become part of the group. Meanwhile, non-probability samples are often used for qualitative research, such as focus groups, auditorium testing, call-out music research, those sort of things. This means that not every member of the population under the study has an equal chance of being selected. And there's various reasons for this, because we want to make sure that the people that we are including in these particular types of studies fit certain criteria that is more than just being a part of the population. So there are differences in how we look at the data based on what the sample is and how we got the sample. So keep those things in mind. Something else to keep in mind is that all data that we gather and collect and receive and put out has a certain degree of error to it. All ratings are only estimates of audience viewing and listening. Therefore, they're subject to a certain degree of error from sampling procedures, and that's called the standard error. Probably the most familiar we are with this are when we're taking polls, like opinions from people on the street, or during election time when there's exit polling of what candidate people voted for and things like that. And many times we will hear of a certain percentage of margin of error. We're talking about the same sort of thing here, because we can't guarantee that the data that we collect are going to be 100% perfect, because again, most of the time we are not dealing with asking the entire population and having hard and fast numbers in that sort of way. Standard error is directly affected by the size of the sample. So, if the number of people that we asked is a smaller group, then the standard error could potentially be larger. The larger the sample size that we collect, the more accurate the numbers are going to be. So we have a particular confidence interval that we can rely on, and that's that deviation that we assign to particular statistics that we gather. A confidence interval of 95%, for example, would mean that 95 out of 100 times we can be sure that the results will fall within a certain range. And you're combining that number with the standard error. So the standard error plus the confidence interval is going to determine how trustworthy the data that we collect are, at least by the best estimates that we can gather. That's something to keep in mind, that when we do ratings and shares and other sorts of data where we quantify these sorts of things, it's going to be pretty near impossible to make sure that data is 100% correct. Research vendors obtain accreditation from the Media Rating Council, the MRC. This is an organization of research professionals drawn from several media-related fields. To ensure that the data are accurate and objective, the MRC examines the methodologies and procedures used in their collection. So there is a watchdog / accountability organization that keeps track of these things and makes sure that organizations are doing their best due diligence to have some sort of truth in the numbers that they portray and put out. Social media analytics. Social media platforms do not rely on ratings and share. Instead, the platforms use a wide variety of analytical tools or analytics to measure the platform as a whole. And some of these tools are platform specific. So when we've talked about this in terms of getting various numbers from different platforms, different streaming services and things like that, for the longest time, those numbers have been derived in various different ways from the different platforms themselves, and the ways that the numbers would be gathered couldn't necessarily be apples to apples compared to numbers generated by other streaming services. Nielsen and other companies are working to try to make that more homogeneous, but there are still many platforms out there that have their own analytical tools, and the way that those tools are used and the way that those numbers come about don't necessarily match up with the way that other services provide those sort of things. So in trying to combine those numbers to get big picture sort of data, that can be challenging. At a minimum, new managers are going to be interested in the following types of data when evaluating social media efforts. You see them on your screen here. The new users or followers, the number of new people coming on, numbers of new likes and subscribers and that sort of thing. Time spent on the platform, how long you are interfacing with that particular service, and they can even track the specific hours of the day, the specific content that you're consuming. That's how the algorithms work on many of these platforms. Content reviewed on the platform can determine what the audience is interested, what they're interested in, I should say, what content is most and least attractive, other insights like that. So they keep track of the specific things that people are consuming. Traffic sources can tell you how the user found your site. Did they find it through direct typing in of the URL? Did they find you through a search engine or linked from some other source? They're able to determine that. And the location of the users, where you are physically, what sort of device you are using, whether it's a computer, a tablet, a smartphone, something else. All those things are gathered, and the information there is crucial in helping people understand not just when they're on and what they're watching, but how they're consuming it. Are they in the comfort of their home? Are they out and about doing different things? What sort of competition is there for the gathering of the attention of the consumer? All of that information, vitally important. Research application. While most research data is naturally tied to programming and sales efforts, research also can be used very effectively in marketing and branding efforts. Inflating or misrepresenting the actual numbers, usually in efforts to secure advertising or negotiate higher rates, is a serious ethical breach as well as grounds for legal action. So we want to make sure that we are being honest with the data, that when we present certain data, we do it in light of what that data truly represents, any surrounding circumstances regarding the numbers that we throw out and that sort of thing. That's how you can have 3 different television stations all saying that their news product is number 1 in the market, but they have to include the disclaimers that it's number 1 within a certain demographic, or it's number 1 in this particular time slot, or it's number 1 in terms of the number of awards received by a certain accreditation entity. So, you have to pay attention to what is truly being said, and the media companies, they have to make sure that what is truly being said is true in light of how they're saying it. From mass media to consumer media, research across all media documents a fragmented landscape, with audiences shifting time from traditional media to digital technologies. We're seeing that more and more and more as people that have the capability to are many times abandoning traditional broadcast media for things that are available on various online platforms. Technology has moved us from an era of mass media to an era of consumer media, I should say, where consumers drive choice and consumption. You can take a look at the table in your textbook that kind of shows a little bit of how that shift is taking place. We are getting into this era of what we would call a discontinuous change, where there is a fundamental shift in the different methodologies and tools that we use to consume different types of media. And it very much is becoming something that is more consumer driven in the fact that the consumer herself has a lot of control in terms of the actual content that they are consuming. Marketers in this expanding media environment are more interested in audience expressions rather than impressions. What do we mean by that? When we're talking about expressions, we're talking about how and why audiences react to the content. We talk a lot about the idea that when we're in communication, we're trying to connect with somebody on an emotional level, and getting them to elicit some sort of a response in terms of happiness, sadness, anger, surprise, whatever the case may be. And there's still a certain amount of that is happening. And it's becoming more and more of an important factor, because those expressions don't just happen in terms of the direct response to the content that we provide, but they're also vocalizing that expression in terms of comments on videos, liking or disliking something, the degree to which they share content with others, and that sort of thing. That's their way of expressing those sort of things, as opposed to us just simply making an impression. Today's media manager must think of how to reach audiences using a variety of electronic and digital media platforms, and which particular platforms to invest it in. There are several different ways to put content out there, some of them more popular than others, some of them more appropriate than others, despite popularity, because of the types of audiences that use particular platforms. Applications designed for smartphones and tablets offer new ways to research audiences and to obtain feedback from audience members. So there's a lot more to navigate, but as you navigate through it, there is less ambiguity as to the court of public opinion in terms of what audiences are looking for, and being very direct about making those reactions and those demands on those that create content. And those are all things that we need to consider as we strategize the things that our companies do in the media world, what we provide, how we're listening to our audiences, and if we don't listen to them, the advertisers simply are, and they'll find those that do listen to audiences in order to spend their advertising dollars, or perhaps just go a different direction altogether. So there you go. There is Chapter 7